Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tools and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have guest Nicole Kerr. She is the co-author of Eating the Rainbow, Lifelong Nutritional Wellness Without Lies, Hype, or Calculus. She has appeared on CNN, PBS, CBS, ABC, and the Food Channel, and a host of other TV and radio shows to share her unique perspective on wellness, lifestyle, and nutrition. When Nicole was 19 years old, she suffered a terrifying yet transformative near-death experience. Her memory of the car crash came back 20 years later, and it has taken Nicole almost 2 decades to heal. Through that process, she wrote a book, Are Deathless, a near-death experience taught me how to fully live and not fear death. She now maintains a private practice, primarily using Neuro Emotional Technique, targeting one's emotional, energy, and spiritual well-being. Welcome, Nicole. I'm so delighted to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you, Tanya. I'm delighted to be here as well. You are just radiating there.
Thank you. And so I guess I need to radiate a little bit because we're going to be talking about some heavy stuff today, right? We're going to be talking about overcoming the fear of death. Yes.
Yes. And I think, of course, that is the great unknown, right? For all of us. And
absolutely.
So somewhere in that unconscious, unless you've been over to the other side and back, most of us do have some unconscious fear of death.
Absolutely. And so I worked in death and loss for nearly 20 years. I worked in hospice care. I worked in organ donation, and being an intuitive empath, I was also seeing things on the other side that, many people don't often experience. So I personally feel I have a very different perspective on death. And I've also had a near-death experience myself. And so I always love to talk to other near-death experiencers about their experiences because mine was a little different than, most of the NDEers that I've had on my show. So let's start off with your story, Nicole, and paint a picture for the listeners on what it was that you actually went through when you experienced this near-death experience.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say I think our country really does need to reframe how we think about death. Okay, I'm going to put that out there first. In almost every book that is written, death itself is cloaked in a veil of doom and gloom, and it has this cloud of depression around it and negativity throughout our culture and society. So what I would like to do is start talking about it in a more positive frame of mind and realize that death itself is actually beautiful. It's brilliant. It's, I didn't want to come back. That's how wonderful it was. Yeah. So I think the process of dying can be painful for some people, but the actual pain there is no pain in death. So I really want people to, in my book, really understand the 10 common lessons that near-death experiencers have, and they're all 10 in their annual report with the International Association of Near-Death Studies. They're all positive things that happen, and the first one is you don't, quote, die. And that is meaning your soul, your spirit does not die. Yes, this physical vessel does decay and it does die, but your soul and your spirit lift right on out of you and go straight up to the next destination.
And that's what I used to visualize, Nicole. I would see that because I'm highly psychic and intuitive. And I would see that when I was at the bedside with patients who were passing over. I would literally see the soul leave the body. So I wasn't experiencing it myself, but I was witnessing it happening. Yeah. So I knew deep down inside then, there's more to death. There's more to the other side.
Oh, absolutely. And my experience was, I was my soul was in the wrong place and I couldn't get out of it, the situation. I was a cadet at the United States Air Force Academy. Okay. My class was the 6th class of women. So I went at a time where women were really not wanted there. Okay. It was a real cultural shift to start admitting women to the academies and integrating them into them. So I experienced a lot of abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. And I went because I have a identity or a trait, or I used to have, let me put it in the past tense because I worked dang hard to get rid of it, as a people pleaser. Okay. So what was I going to do? I was going to step up and be one of the kids that my dad wanted one of us to go to the Air Force Academy and follow in his footsteps. And I signed up. I was like, I'm going to do this. I had no interest in killing people, no interest in the military, no interest in airplanes. Okay. I was on a team board. I modeled, I did all kinds of things like that in high school. I was not part of a aerospace club or anything like that. So for me to go there was a complete shock to my soul and to my system. And I knew the first 3 weeks in basic training, when we got to call home, I knew that I was in the wrong place, because we got 1 3-minute phone call. Okay. This is back before cell phones. And I heard my mother's voice on the other end, and I just hyperventilated and cried for the whole 3 minutes. I could not get out one word. And then the commander goes, "That's it, Kerr." And he could tell I was really upset. He said, "You just go sit over there and get yourself together." Well, many, many, many decades later, I realized that was my first panic attack, where I couldn't get my words out. I couldn't get my voice out. And my mother turned to my father and later told me, she said, "What have we done to that girl?" And Dad goes, "She'll be all right." I was anything from all right. Okay. I went from there to remedial one-on-one for the next 3 weeks, which was horrible, and I survived, but I lived in total terror and total fear of just getting kicked out, of failing out, of doing something that would get me what do I want to say, a black mark in terms of, being there. And it took a lot to get there. If anybody knows the process, you have to have a congressional nomination. You have to score high on your ACTs, SATs, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it really is not an easy, the academies are not easy to get into. So I was scared of failing. I didn't want to disappoint, and I didn't want to face the shame of my father of just saying, this isn't for me, even though I knew it, what the exercises, the obstacle course, the bayonet assault course. I'm like, what the heck am I doing? So I couldn't quit. And then I get through my first year. In the beginning of the second year, we had a big squadron kickoff for the next year. And I'm getting in deeper and deeper, Tanya, and I can't, it's like, oh no, now I'm taking electrical engineering. Okay. Organic chemistry, I barely got it out of with a D. Okay.
Oh gosh, just those words. I'm like, oh,
I'm just not, my brain isn't wired that way. Okay. Give me anatomy, physiology, psychology, stuff like that. I love it. But mechanical, chemical engineering, that whole part, physics, I don't care how the plane takes off. I'm just glad it takes off and stays up there. Okay. I don't need to know how the electricity works. I just want to flip the switch and boom, on it goes, So I was definitely going, this is getting harder and harder and harder. And so I couldn't quit, and I didn't have permission. What I needed on that call from my mother was permission to say, if this isn't for you, Nicole, you can come home. There's no shame in it, no blame. We'll find you another school to go to. It's not a big deal. You're not loved any less because you want to quit. And that was what I didn't get. I didn't get that permission to quit and come home. And that's what I needed in order to have done that. Otherwise, I couldn't face the shame and the humiliation. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
And that day, it was a Sunday, I got there late because I had gone to the Commandant of Cadets had asked me to come talk to high school females to come to the Air Force Academy.
Oh, no. You're sure. Like, oh, let me talk to all the people.
How ironic is that? So I go to this event, it's softball. The Air Force provided beer for underage cadets, I might say. And so I was the last to leave, and there was a senior, and I said, "Hey, do you mind if I get a ride back with you?" And he's like, "No." So he happened to be in a Corvette convertible, and I was like, "Ooh, we can't have cars out there till we're juniors or seniors." And he was a senior. It was in my squadron, but I didn't know him hardly at all. Went and stopped by a bar, and we had a couple of beers, and then he wanted to watch the sunset. And I was worried about getting back to the academy on time. 7:35 was our curfew. And I didn't realize this guy, once I got in the car with him, had this whole agenda of wanting to actually make out. I was naive. I did not date in high school. That was one of my dad's commandments. In the book, I talk about him being a Marine officer, and that God has the 10 commandments and my dad has his 10 commandments, and so it really, his rules were no dating upper cadets, no smoking, and no drinking. So we never made it back. Once we went to see the sunset, we got back in the car, and the next thing I remembered was waking up in the ICU. And the first thing I said was, "Don't tell my dad, he'll kill me." That's how terrified I was of my father's reaction.
You had more fear of your dad than you did of death or of the
Yes.
car, of the accident.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
Yeah, that shows you the terror and the power that and the control that I lived with growing up with somebody who was like, "You do it my way." And he even told the other three, my siblings, he said, "This is what happens when you don't listen to me," because he assumed I was dating the guy. I did have a beer and I did have a cigarette. Okay. That was the first time I'd had, quote, fun in my life, and I get slammed. Okay. I mean, slammed. So what I go through the hospital, 4 months, major injuries. And then 19 years later, my memory comes back. Now, I quote, died at the scene at age 19. 19 years later, my memory comes back. Almost the exact time period. I'm coming out of Starbucks. I'm going to work at the CDC in Atlanta, Georgia. And all of a sudden, clear as daylight, I remembered how I was sitting in the Corvette, and I could never figure out how I cut up all the different areas I did without having brain damage or some kind of spinal injury. Because what happened was I cut my left foot off. I broke my pelvis on both sides. I severed my right wrist. I had a bad road burn from skidding on the pavement. And then I cut up all the insides of my thigh. So a 4th-degree laceration between my anal and sphincter muscle, and then I cut a huge hole in my right inner thigh. And I couldn't understand how I messed up that whole area. Okay. And so there I was, I saw it, and it was like I had one foot on the dashboard and the other foot crossed over. You know how you cross one leg over, and it was sitting back. It had no seat belt. And so I went butt up through the windshield.
And working in the ICU, it's funny, all of us nurses, when we would work in the ICU, we'd be like, "Do not put your foot out the window. Do not put your feet on the dashboard." Like, this is one thing I tell people all the time. Do not do that, because if that happens, that's what can happen.
Yeah. So that was the end of my sex life. I'll just go ahead and tell your listeners right now, I never had sex before, and I tore that area up so bad that my nerves, even to this day, don't work right. And so, and then I had to have a colostomy to divert the stool because that area was so infected. So I was in the hospital 4 months, ICU for 7 weeks, and it was a roller coaster.
So I had no head injury, no spinal injury.
No.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. But I do suffer from migraines. Okay. And I did, looking at it now, I had a traumatic brain injury because I was unconscious for 12 hours. Okay. And now, 19 years later, I remember exactly what happened. So instead of going to work, I go to my chiropractor, who's a body worker. And he was full. He's like, "Nicole, I can't get you in." And the the lady said, Nicole, just sit there all day. We'll work you in. So I did. And he did work me in. And he said, what's happening are repressed memories, and they're coming up in your body. And I'm like, why now? Why 19 years later? Because the only thing, Tanya, I had remembered was bright white light. That was it, the entire 19 years. And I thought they were maybe the operating room lights. At some point I became conscious and I saw them, but no, I asked my surgeon later and she said, there's no way it could be the operating room lights. She said, I think you had a near-death experience. In fact, I think you had several of them during that time because you coded on an operation where we actually called the time on you and told your parents you were dead. And then you started up again. So, it's just every time we thought you were gone, something would come and intervene and you would get going again. So clearly I didn't want to stay. I kept trying to go back, but I have a military angel named James that is with me and will be with me till I pass. And that may sound like an oxymoron, but he protects me and he is there for me. And he fought for me to stay here and stay alive because he knew how important this message was going to be for people and how much they needed to hear this, because we are living in such a divisive time right now and a fear-based society, and fear lowers your vibration. Fear keeps you from having clarity. You're not going to make decisions when you're full. What should I say? You're not going to make the highest and greatest good decision for you and others when you are in fear, because you're stuck in that amygdala where you're fight, flight, or freeze, instead of being able to rationalize and come from an intellectual, executive reasoning functioning from that neocortex, prefrontal neocortex.
Yeah. And when you're in that fearful state, you are not in alignment with your soul self, your higher self, that higher version of you. And so you're making decisions based, irrationally. Sometimes you might be making decisions off of what other people are doing. Yes. So you're not really in a state of calm where you have that clarity of, what is my heart telling me to do? What is my body telling me to do? Versus just, what is the chaos around me telling me to do?
That's exactly right. And that's one of the things that you have to do in order to transmute the fear, is to get into alignment. And what I realized is most people, including me, we are like cut off at the neck. We intellectually process our emotions. So if something happens like my wreck, I go, okay, I should be mad at the driver. I'm mad at the driver, but I never let it embody me. I never get that anger into the rest of my body. And, I went through therapy. I put myself through therapy and I hit pillows and all this other stuff, but that never got it into my body, and I know that back then that was the best that was available, but we've learned so much since about PTSD, about, trauma.
Regression therapy too, regressing back to that time. And so let me ask you this, did the driver live through that?
Yes, he was drunk, double the limit, and had some scratches on his back. And he is, let's just say that his dad was wearing 3 stars at the time. And this is the injustice piece that I have. Rank has its privileges, and they were able to have him. He was a senior, continue to stay there and graduate.
Reminds me of that movie, A Few Good Men, with Nicholson, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's just really, it was, that was hard, and he never apologized to me. And I know he was an alcoholic, and I was just really, that was a hard one. That was a real hard one. But I let it go and I moved on in my life. And I will tell you that when my memory came back, what the memory was crossing over to the other side.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So in my book, I talk about exactly what happened when I died. And so I'm not going to read any of that, but it really, the book is a lot more detailed and a lot more, it has pictures, and people can really get the sense of what I really, really went through. by reading it, and I'm also working on an audio version of it as well. But when when the car crashed, my body flew out through the windshield, okay, butt first, and I got to a certain point in the air and I froze, and I looked down and I could see that I was going to die. And I just was like, oh my God, I know I'm going to die, and there's nothing I can do about it. Now, that is the ultimate lack of control. And I think that's what I have suffered with in a lot of realms for my whole adulthood, is needing to control things, because at that point, you're completely helpless. And so when I'm up in the air, I feel this spirit. And in the book, I kind of talk about Casper the ghost, but without a form. And it came and my soul flew out of me up there. So I didn't crash into the earth with my soul intact. So I went up, and then my physical body went down.
And that's similarly what happened to me. I was underwater, and it was very similar. I was trapped underwater, and I felt the same. I felt like my soul left, but it was hovering, but it was giving my body guidance. It was giving my body guidance on what to do. It was very, very weird, kind of surreal situation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these are all surreal situations, and
but I knew it wasn't my time to go. Where yours sounded differently. It was almost like you're like, I'm going to die, where mine was more like, you're not going to die, you're going to get through this, so mine was a little different. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yours, it was positive.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
After it was all said and done, it was positive. In the moment, I'm like, what is happening?
That's what I say 40 years later, now that the book's out. And it's like, yeah, I can see all the positive in it now. But God, it has been a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of just trying to find my way in the world, and trying all these different therapies and modalities, and, who is God, and how to connect to what this concept of God really is for me, and going through so much, because you have to just unravel these false belief systems that are embedded in you. And I didn't realize that how many I had. I mean, it was like a haunted house. Every room I went in, there was like, oh God, I got to clear this room out. Now this room, because I never got to individuate as a really little kid. I was, around 6 years old is when we start individuating. And I actually was such a pleaser that my dad knew what was best for all of us. So we were just going to do what he said. It wasn't about what we wanted at all. So I think that's when you miss these developmental stages, it really does put you back in terms of development, and you never figure out who you are unless you have an experience later in life, and that kind of wakes you up, and you say, oh my God,
you're like, I'm not living the life. And this is, I've interviewed several near-death experiencers, and many of them will tell me that they felt like their life before the NDE was on a path that wasn't meant to be where they were going. It was basically like, their NDE was a transitionary period for them, or a shift on their timeline, or a different path, and a shift in frequency. And I guess mine wasn't necessarily that way, but I can see, I've had the concept of a walk-in or a soul exchange, and I've talked about this on my show several times. And so I didn't have a soul exchange during my NDE, but I've talked to several NDEers who have had that soul exchange. It's almost like a different version of themselves, or a different aspect of their soul comes in and puts them on a completely different trajectory. And, so do you think maybe that's what happened to you, or have you been able to explore that a little bit?
Yeah, I actually have explored that a little bit. And one I want to say is, when I was lifted up, I found, I guess it was, my book came out in August, and toward the end of August, I realized that Casper the ghost was my grandfather. Oh. And he came in the form of an angel. And he knew at 19, my belief system was, my dad was Southern Baptist and my mother was Lutheran. So we got two different concepts of what is right in terms of God. And we spent a lot of time in church, and people from the South will tell you that when you go to church, it's
oh yeah. I lived in Florida for 20 years and was married to a Southern Baptist. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So hellfire and brimstone, if you do not do the right thing. So needless to say, that I did know about the archangels and angels from reading the Bible. And so that was a form that I would recognize when he came and lifted me up. And then when I got on this, it's a different level. I can't even explain it. We just went up and I could see the earth and other things. And there were other voices, but I wasn't in my human form. I could hear other voices around me. And the voices that I was really clear about hearing was a conversation about they need to ask us for help, meaning the human beings on the planet Earth need to ask the angels for help. And that is a message that they wanted me to hear so that I could repeat that as well. Because
that makes me teary-eyed a little bit. Like I just got goosebumps. It's like, I've been feeling that too. And maybe you're just validating that for me and the listeners, but whoa, that just hit me.
Yeah.
That message just hit me.
and the thing that prevents them, they will intervene if it's a emergency situation. Like with me, they just came in and swooped me up. But normally, because we have free will, we get to make decisions. That's the way the earth we're set up. They're not going to interfere. They're going to let things just play out. So you have to get in the habit, and it is a habit of asking for help from the higher realm, from the angels. And they will, let me say that again, they will help you, but it may not be in the way that you think, but it's always going to be for the highest and greatest good of all.
That's amazing.
So please, we all have guardian angels. Okay. Every single person has either at least one guardian angel. I know I have two. And then I have, James and some others, but everybody has one that is with them. And then you have a spirit guide as well. And I think, so many people run around and are not even aware of that. They're not conscious about that. Maybe they haven't just been exposed to those terms because they've been locked into an institution
or into the
theology. Where it doesn't even allow for that concept to be brought up. It's like, no, who do you think you are? You're above God. I'm like, you're one with God.
Absolutely. And I joke with my friends that I have a bunch of angels just hanging out, like unemployed angels waiting for me to give them a job. It's like, hey, okay, I need some help in this realm or area of my life. So who's willing to step in and assist?
And people laugh at people that say, "Oh, I need help with a parking space," but
it's funny. My parents pick on me because they're like, "How do you always get the upfront parking space?" I said, "Because I have a parking angel." I've said that for years.
And I was doubting it I was just like driving in town with this little old lady. She's 83. And I was like, oh my God, it's all parallel parking. And I was like, how is she going to do this? And because there was no spaces. And so I just said, okay, angels, we need a parking space. And wouldn't you know it, this lady comes out of a store, gets right in a pickup truck right in front. And I go, there's our space. And she parallel parked in there. And I was like, oh my gosh. But, it's just, I asked on our behalf, and it never ceases to amaze me. And that's what I love about the divine and the mystery of life, is the magic of it. When you get to that point in your relationship with God and angels and spirit in the world, you start looking for the magic, you start looking for the positive, and it just shows up in ways. And then you have to go, man, I would have never thought about it, like showing up that way. So
and they'll bombard you with it too. It's like, be careful what you ask for, because you're like, oh, for example, I had a situation, an experience like a month ago. It was the day that my grandmother had died 2 years ago, and her and our thing was ladybugs. So that morning I was going on a hike with friends, and I had asked my friends, I'd asked my grandmother to please show me one ladybug. I'd love to see you. I'm going out into nature. I'd like to experience you today. I'm not even joking, Nicole. That hike, we saw thousands and thousands of swarms of ladybugs. And it was so hilarious how she showed up. But as we kept walking, we saw one, and then we saw maybe 10, and then we'd see 100, and then we saw thousands. It was like she was manifesting more and more as we continued on the path. But by the end of that hike, I had them. I got home. They were in my jacket. I had them in my hair. It was so funny. But like what you're saying, we just have to ask, and we just have to communicate. And then we have to listen and tune in to that, radio station, so to speak.
Yes,
and they are there, ready and willing and waiting to communicate with us back.
Yeah. So that's the first message. Now, the second message was directly for me. And that was that I was going back, and I was like, no, because I felt like such bliss where I was. Okay. It was like this white light that had cocooned me, and just, there was no pain, there was no suffering, there was no judgment, there was no mistakes. I was one with God. It was all just wrapped up in just absolutely fluid bliss. And so I didn't want to go back, because I could see that body down there, and I could see how mangled. And I knew that I was going to be going back into a household where I was going to be pretty much an infant again. And I was going to be dependent on my parents. And that meant the church that I was, everything was just going to go back to that status. I wasn't able to individuate again now at age 19, okay, where I just thought I was again.
You're like, you tried to be an adult, and then now you're right back in to being a kiddo again.
Yeah. So, and then my mom and I got real codependent, because I had no friends. They were all off in college. I, relied on her for everything. And then when about a year after the wreck, my dad said, okay, you and your mother are getting too close. Physically, you're doing much better, but we're going to send you to Dallas to go live with your sister and go to school. And when I had left the academy, doctor had told me that I needed to get mental health, that I had a lot of trauma I need to process. And my mother just looked at him and said, Jesus and God are our psychologist and psychiatrist, and we don't need you. And that was wrong. And I want people to know that when you say that is, God is not a person. He's not going to come here and tell me, okay, Nicole, let's see what happened. When you're feeling anxious, what's going on? That's not how that works. God is not a vending machine. And that's what I had to get through, is this concept that God is energy, God is love, period, end of statement. There's not a duality with God. God is not God is not judgmental or punitive, or the wrath of God. That is all man-made concepts that are designed to keep us in fear. And it's not true. And Jesus is amazing. I love Jesus. He's a way shower, but Jesus is not going to come fix me either with mental health. Okay. So what happens is I develop an eating disorder. I compulsively overeat, almost exactly when I was transferred to my sister, when I lost that bond with my mother. And now I was on my own. I was alone. I was going to a community college to see if I could get my brain working. And my sister had just graduated. She was, dating and just having all the fun life in Dallas. And I'm just like, yeah, and I'm alone. So food became my friend. The dopamine just caused all that pain to just go away for a brief minute. So I developed that, and it was almost 20 years before I really got to the root of the eating disorder, and was able to work through that, because
it's like, that was just a symptom of the trauma. It's like you have all of this trauma trapped, unprocessed in your body, and now you're looking for tangible ways to fill the holes, to fill the void, to feel love, to not deal with the pain, to do whatever that may be. It could look like food, substance abuse, depression, anxiety. However it looks, it's how we choose to fill that void within us.
Cope. But it's an unhealthy coping trauma mechanism. And I didn't know much about it back then. I think Overeaters Anonymous was the only thing really out there. And we had known that Karen Carpenter died from anorexia, the other extreme, that was about it with eating disorders. And, nowadays, of course, there's been so much more research and so much more help, and people understand what the pain is about. It's not about sitting there eating, regulating your food or controlling your food. It's about the feeling of being out of control, and now in our society, you're seeing so much more PTSD, trauma, anxiety, and depression, with the pandemic and everything
and
else.
OCD. Yep. I feel like a lot of my clients, they struggle, and I struggle with that for years. And it's that out of control feeling of, you want to be in control.
Yeah. So you get it. So the message was, when he told me I was going back, and I was like, no, was, Nicole, you have a mission and a purpose, and it's to tell people not to be afraid of death. And I'm like, oh my God, do you know how big that message is?
You're like, I'm not sure I'm ready for this.
This affects every single person on this globe. Just, it's kind of ironic. The tropical storm Nicole just is coming through right now as we're taping this, and I'm going, okay, I guess I am coming through with the force of a storm here, with this message.
And I can feel for you down there in Florida. I lived there for 20 years, and I went through my fair share of hurricanes.
Well, I'm in North Carolina, but on the Outer Banks there, so it's the same. It's kind of the same. My brother's in Daytona, so
that's where I was.
Yeah. So anyway, and that was basically, I remember, just like your screen, colors. There were colors that I saw that weren't even in the Crayola box of, is it 64 still that has this sharpener?
So.
I don't know. I haven't been to elementary school, but there's so many more colors that we can't even imagine. And what does the color white do?
Purification, Tanya? Cleansing?
Yeah, but it absorbs all colors, right?
Oh, okay.
So if you think about God, and everybody that has a near-death experience, Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience, said that is the most common, is seeing this white, clear light. It doesn't blind you, but you just feel so cocooned in it. That's God. Yeah. And that's all the colors all in one radiating throughout you. And I just stopped for a minute and I thought, oh my God, how beautiful is that? So I just think I figured out the white light piece, because it is all the colors wrapped up, and that is the energy and feeling and God's presence.
That's amazing. Because I would see that with patients who would code, and then they'd come back and I'd be like, what'd you see? What'd you experience? And like, I saw a white light. I mean, it was usually a white light, or I saw someone there, waiting for me, or I saw a loved one, or whatever it may be. And so, Nicole, the name of your book is You Are Deathless. So why do you claim that we're all deathless? Like, can you explain that? What is that message to society on how to overcome that fear of death?
Yeah, that's pretty audacious of me to say that, isn't it?
Hey, I agree with you 100%. And like I said, I would visualize people crossing over, and they were at peace. I could tell, I could see it. They were at peace. So, based off of your experience, how, for those out there who are terrified of death. My grandmother, she was 91 when she passed, and she knew her time was coming, but she would call me weeks before she passed, and she was terrified. And you talked about giving permission. And I had told my dad, hey, Dad, it's time for you to give Grandma permission to go. And within hours, she passed. So, I've always shared that with the families that were there at the bedside when they wanted their loved ones to finally let go. Give them permission. That's what they want.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, in my book, I have a checklist about what fears that you may experience when you think about your own death. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people are anxious about the way they will die, that uncertainty. Is there going to be physical pain? And there may be up until your final moment of death, but I can tell you at that final moment, there is no pain. Mm-hmm. Being alone, that's another one a lot of people are fearful of. They don't want to die alone. And I will tell you, especially with the pandemic and, restrictions on hospitals, a lot of people did die quote alone.
Yeah, my grandmother was one.
Not another human was there except maybe a nurse, but I would tell you, you are not alone. The spiritual realm is always with you. And when you die, you have angels that come in, you have deceased loved ones that come in, and they all escort you over to the other side. So you are never alone in spirit. Ever.
Even before you cross over, I would witness this with the hospice patients. They were having this connection with the other side days, weeks prior to their passing, because they would, if they could verbalize it, some of them would verbalize it, that they were seeing loved ones who had passed, for them, or they were seeing angels or beings, or however they explained it. But they're there ready to assist you when you're ready to let go of this physical body in this physical realm.
Yeah. And you'll see a lot of them like reaching out. And I think a lot of doctors and family members are just saying, oh, she's hallucinating. It's not hallucinating. It's actually they're going across the veil and coming back. So they are, it may appear that they're hallucinating because we can't physically see what they're trying to touch or grab, but it's not hallucination. It's actually them interacting with the other side and trying to, it's that coming back and going the back and forth until they do finally cross over entirely. But it really is, my experience, along with thousands, hundreds of thousands of others, and you yourself, it's amazing to me how many people are now saying that they have had an NDE. I just gave a talk at Kaiser in LA, and I would say a tenth of the audience had a near-death experience. And death is absolute beauty, light, and loving kindness on the other side. And, I don't want to take away from the human part of us that grieves and has pain over the loss. And, we need to carefully and compassionately hold and heal that for people. But the cosmic context is benevolent and extraordinary. And knowing that, true context, I think, enables us to live a happier life, to prepare for our own graceful passing, and to support others as they approach their own transition. So the reason I say it is because you do not die. Your spirit, your soul, who you truly are, the light, the love, that transcends, and it has a long trajectory, and it has many incarnations. Let's just say that.
Absolutely. And it's like, it's just an energy transference. And so when I was at the bedside, oftentimes after the patient was extubated or withdrawn from life support, I would be there with them while they were crossing over. And I started to experience what I now understand is what's known as a shared death experience. So me in the physical realm was assisting this person to the other side. And so my consciousness was actually going with them to assist them to the light. And then I was coming back into my physical body. But what I was recognizing, because my staff would take notes on, the time they stopped breathing, and then the time of death and all this, I was noticing that my time frame was not aligning with their time frame. So I began to recognize that I was having lost time during these moments of what's known as a shared death experience. And I had this happen. Like I said, I worked in this industry for nearly 20 years, and I would have these experiences, not every time, but oftentimes. And it wasn't until maybe a year ago when I actually learned what this concept was. And so it was like I was experiencing from a physical and a spiritual level people crossing over. So I was also almost without having a near-death experience prior to my near-death experience, not having an understanding of the light and the other side, of things, because I was seeing the mists coming in and out of people when they would code, or we would resuscitate them. And I'm like, what am I seeing? But I never verbalized this to anyone. And I actually just talked to a friend recently, a few nights ago, about this, who worked with me. And she says, Tanya, I used to see stuff too, but she goes, I felt like I could have talked to you about it, but I wasn't sure. So I think a lot of people experience these things, Nicole. A lot of people experience near-death experiences. Me, I didn't even really know what had happened to me that day that I had drowned and I was trapped. I should probably share this story on my show. I've never really shared it.
I would definitely encourage you to do that.
Yeah. And I didn't even really know what it was until I started to interview people like you who had experienced this. And I'm thinking, I think I did have a near-death experience. I mean, I was under the water for more than 2 minutes, and I had left my body, all these things that happened. So I think just you being vulnerable, coming out, sharing your story, writing a book about it is going to help so many people out there. I have so many friends who didn't work with me in the field, who are in different areas in their life that struggle with this. I have one specific friend. She's like, I am terrified of death. And she'll probably end up watching this show. She'll probably know who I'm talking about. But I hope that, this information that you're sharing, that I'm sharing, is of value to all of you listeners and watchers out there who are struggling with death, who you maybe, I even had a friend who told me she was in her 20s and terrified of death. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, you're so young, but here you are 19 and almost, almost died.
Yeah. And the thing about that is you don't fully live your life. Mm-hmm. You don't fully come into who you really are if you're always in fear and you're always scared that, something may happen.
Yeah.
and then, the other thing I want to say is with trauma, if you don't heal those trauma wounds, you will pass them on. And that is why this time on this time and space on earth is for us to be healing these trauma wounds ourselves so that we're not passing them forward in a generation. Because my mother and dad both endured a lot of trauma. My mother was from Kiev during the bombing, and now here's Kiev going, she never got any mental health. They did not believe in that. Okay. They just gutted through it, just persevered. And they think since they did it, they're okay, and that you should.
And then they teach us to do that, right?
Yeah. And they think because you're physically okay, that you are mentally and spiritually okay. But we all seem to be getting spiritual amnesia, which is we forget that we are basically God walking around on earth, and that, to remember who the being was that we were born to be, not who someone else wanted us to be. Most of us started going in that direction if we had, overprotective parents, overburdening, if we had trauma, if we had abuse. And so, it's all these filters start coming in. And I will tell you, when I was dead, they had me covered up. And when the paramedic got there and he took the blanket off of me, it must have been 10 or 20 minutes had passed. He could get no sign of life in me except doing this sternal knuckle press.
Yep, the sternal rub. Yep. That was one of the neuro tests that we would do. Mm-hmm.
That sucker hurts.
It hurts like does, but it hurts for a reason, because you want to see if there's any stimulation there,
That's exactly right.
Or so even the finger, they would really tightly pinch the fingers too.
Well, he told me he did that, and the only sign of life he got was my right eye flickered,
response.
pupil dilated. And I know that that's the moment my soul, when you think about your eyes, they're the windows to your soul. Mm-hmm. So my soul came back in at that moment through my eyes. Okay. And it had left earlier, and that's when he was able to revive me. And then they just had to, my blood pressure was 60/0, and they had to do CPR the whole time, getting me to the hospital. It was not a trauma hospital, but I had an amazing team of I call them angels that were sent to help me heal and to work through those 4 months in a hospital. And it's just, life will throw a lot of things at different people. And it's amazing now, 40 years later, I feel like the Israelites that have been wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years, because this has been my life, is managing myself basically, with all the different aspects and getting myself in alignment. And I really want people to understand the context of the God that they believe in. That is so important, because if you fundamentally believe in a duality of God, that is going to create fear when you die. fear that you're going to be separate, and God is not external, God is internal
within.
And that is the whole thing, is we're all, the souls are going to go up, so. And I'm not sure about those that are really evil. I don't know how you feel about that. I think they may have a wobble or two. They don't go straight up.
I don't even know. I did notice when I was talking to my friend about this, who could see the mists that I was seeing, and I would see really dark looking ones and I would see very light looking ones. And it was, I think for us in this third dimension, we look at it as duality. You're like, okay, there's a white mist that must be going to light. There's a dark mist that could be going to the concept of hell, which is that construct of heaven and hell that we've created here, on earth. And so, at the time, this was well before my awakening, I was kind of like, ooh, that person's, that's an evil person or whatnot. But now I really don't know, because I do feel like from a soul standpoint, we sign up for our experiences and we sign up for what we want to experience here on earth. And you obviously probably signed up to have a near-death experience, so that way you could experience what you did on the other side, to be able to come back and share, that with people here on earth, to help people understand that there should not be a fear, of death. We are all going to experience it at some point, right?
Yeah.
And it's best to just do it with grace and peace.
Yeah, let go of the resistance and try to and start having these conversations, and to start talking about it. Take the questions at the back of my book. I have a book club discussion. I mean, think about what a book club it would be to read this book, and to actually talk about the questions about death and how your fellow friends and family members feel about it, and start dialogue about it,
and do it now before you're sick, before you have these issues. I would say that to people. It's like, you're a healthy 25-year-old, have these conversations. And my parents, I was sitting them down, and they're in their 40s and 50s, saying, hey, let's talk about death. Let's talk about this, because I don't want to deal with this when you're sick or you're incapacitated and we can't have these conversations.
Yeah. So I think it needs to be part of, integrated with children, because, and I don't think Halloween did a whole lot to help the concept of death. When you look at the coffins and skeletons and how spooky it all is and terrifying. I'm not sure that that's the best imaging with death, but we do need to transform it. And I've come up with the term, eternality advocate. That's what I've become, because this is a vocation for me, and that means everlasting. And we are our souls are everlasting, without end. And I am just so grateful to have gotten to this point in my life to be able to put it all together and put it in a best-selling book as well. I never thought that it would be a national best-selling book. And the comments and feedback I have gotten about it has just been overwhelming. And I know that I'm on the right path with it. And, not everybody may agree, but it's getting people to think. I'm not giving you answers. I'm asking you to start thinking about this, start dealing with your fears with it, have conversations with loved ones and friends about it, and not make it so doom and gloom. And I want to help change the worldview and vibration and cultural misunderstandings surrounding death. And to do this, we have to start addressing the difficulties getting there, which are the fears.
Exactly. And so, my grandma and I joke, because, she hit, okay, so my grandfather died when he was 54, and they were in love. I mean, that was the love of her life. So she tried to commit suicide a few times, after that, and she just didn't want to be here. But, by the time she was 70, 80, 90, we always would joke about, I would say, Grandma, how are you going to haunt me from the other side? And she's like, I'm going to make you laugh. She goes, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you laugh, and I'm going to make you smile. Well, I tell you what, within days of her death, she was doing things. She was calling my cell phone from her iPhone that she was not on. She was doing all of these things, messing with my cat, just all of this stuff. And I knew I couldn't see her, but I could feel her presence all around me. And I knew she was there with me, and she knew I could understand it. So I think it's I love that you brought up to have this discussion with children too, because I actually had a 6-year-old child come to me crying, telling me he was terrified of death. And this is a 6-year-old. And so I think as parents, we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what are our thoughts around death? And are we projecting that onto our children? Because our children are, at a point where they're so innocent and they're at such a high frequency and a high vibration. And what we project, onto our children can really kind of screw them up or even line them up for their future, right?
Yes,
so
definitely.
If we have irrational thoughts around our own death, and then we're constantly sharing that with our children are in those, especially between the time they're born and age 7, they're in a theta state and they're in those observatory years. They're soaking things up like a sponge, and they're literally learning everything from the people around them, their teachers, their parents, their siblings. And so I love that you brought that up, because that is something, a 6-year-old should not be worrying about their death. That was programmed and trained into them from their parents.
It's amazing you bring up a 6-year-old, because in my book, I talked about working with a 6-year-old, and she came to me and she was like, I'm going to go to hell. And she said, Nicole, I don't want to go to hell. I don't want the devil, and I don't want to burn up. And she said, I'm just really same thing. I'm scared I'm going to go to hell. And she was going to a very fundamentalist church. And I said, well, how do you see God? And she so eagerly told me, and I'm reading from my book here, God is a blue spirit with colors and balloons and all different colors, no head, and can talk. I said, clearly this little girl is still having a direct experience with God, no filters from other people involved. And I hope, I just told her, I said, there is no hell. You're not going to go burn up in the middle of the earth, and there's not a devil, and God loves you. I said, that's all a fairy tale. And I said, you are going you will always be able to see your family. You are love. God is love. And I don't believe that. And her mother, of course, was listening, because she's 6 years old. And that was the last time I had a conversation with her. But my heart at that point, Tanya, I was like, I can't lie.
You can't.
And I'm just going to come out and say it. And she looked at her mom and she goes, Mom, is that the truth? And she goes, we'll discuss it later, but I'm like, oh my God, she's totally, no wonder she gets up in the middle of the night and wants to go sleep in her parents' room, but these are the things. But when she described God, I thought that is the closest concept to God that I have heard that I can relate to. It doesn't have a head, but it talks to you. And all the different colors, which is what I experienced. I mean, I love the rainbow, that I put the rainbow in my marriage vows. I took every color and put what it really meant, and I recited it, and the whole group that was there to witness couldn't even believe it. And I said, because I don't know, me and color have always had a thing. So your background, and then with my book, it's all the colors of my book, which I don't know if you can see, these are all hearts, I just thought, oh, how cool is that? So
well, it's funny, because I usually tune into my guest, and this was what I tuned into. So obviously there was a reason. So yes. Nicole, where can people find your book? Where can people connect more with you?
Well, you can find my book on Amazon, and I would love it if you would leave a review as well. Amazon love reviews, but so do other people. People do read reviews. So, as much as people say, I don't really want to do it, I would really ask that you support authors in general to leave. If you like the book, leave a positive review. And Barnes & Noble has it as well. You can go on their website. Goodreads has it. Books A Million, those outlets, and you can just also Google it. But Amazon and Barnes & Noble are the two big platforms. And then my website is www.NicoleKerr.com. And then I'm on Facebook, Nicole.Angelique.Kerr. I'm on Instagram, same thing. And I'm on LinkedIn. And that's all I can keep up with.
I hear you. I only have 2. I have Facebook and Instagram. That's all I can keep up with.
Yeah. And I'm just like, so And I just wanted to say there was some really exciting news in the field of the science and NDEs today. I don't know if you saw it, but it was lucid dying, and they are giving scientific validation around the concept of near-death studies. They looked at CPR patients, and that is one that Dr. Bruce Greisen talks about, is people that have head injuries or heart with CPR, because they wouldn't be brought back unless somebody else helped in their attempt.
That's what happened to my grandmother. She had a DNR, but they resuscitated her, cracked her ribs all open, and then she ended up living for another 4 months. But during those 4 months, she was miserable, and she was so angry that they brought her back and that they didn't follow her wishes. And so, but I do feel she went to the light and she experienced what you experienced, whether she didn't share that with us, but I do feel that's what happened. She felt that connection
and didn't want to come back. Yeah.
She didn't want to come back, and she didn't want to be here anyway. She was 91 years old,
Yeah.
And so, yes, I do. I encourage people to, to make your wishes known. Be very verbal about them. Let the healthcare team know. Let your family know. Have these discussions. It's so
and get it in
important.
writing.
And get it in writing. And be vocal about it. If you are, or you're headed to the hospital or something is going on, have an advocate there for you, a
absolutely, because you never know. That's the thing about death. You absolutely never know when you will go to the other side, when you'll make your transition. We're not guaranteed that. And most people always think, of course I did at 19, it's not going to happen to me, but that's life, and we live in a free will, and there are people out there doing all kinds of things that will impact me. And we could see it with the mass shootings and stuff like that. You're just going about your daily workout or whatever, and or you're going to school, and to live with that fear that you may not come home that day, that's shame on America.
And that's no way that's no way to live.
Sorry, but I just have to say that. That's terrible.
No, it's not. And that's a frequency too. I feel like if you anchor yourself into that fear vibration, then you're going to manifest and you're going to attract more experiences that will play themselves out in your reality. So really just live your life in joy and in peace and in happiness and calmness as much as you possibly can. And, and I get you can't do it 24/7, but do it as much as you possibly can. And really a lot of it is catching yourself in those fearful states too. And I think, with you, Nicole, doing your, your neuro emotional technique, I do emotional freedom technique. Just really helping people move through the fear. And fear can really, just paralyze us at times. And it's unnecessary.
And then I want to just show you, these are the 10 common NDE lessons. They're in my book. You can actually Google them as well, but that's every one of my chapters starts with them. And I want to just say the second one, love is all that matters and is the source of all that exists. So I want people to love themselves unconditionally. And that is a journey in and of itself that we're all on. So please, no shooting yourself, no shaming yourself, any of that kind of stuff. And that's going to make your life a lot lighter.
Yes, and that's a great note to end on. So, Nicole, I appreciate you coming on the show today. I appreciate your transparency, your vulnerability, and putting yourself out there into the world in a world that's a little chaotic and a little crazy and a little judgmental right now. So I do appreciate the energy that you brought to the show today and the energy that you've put in your book, and for the energy that you're sending out into the universe. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate you. You're an absolute delight, and best wishes to you as well.
You deserve to navigate your life as an empath in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT Tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.thesoulcafe.org.